We acknowledge that we are on the traditional lands of the Kulin Nation. We pay our respects to elders, past, present and emerging, and acknowledge the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people's spirit, imagination and rich history of storytelling and humour that is an inspiration for all Australians.
Hello there guys, welcome back to the Bearer of Weird News. My name is Matt Harvey and I am of course your host for this, our 40th episode. Pretty exciting, turning the big 40. Of course, turning 40 is a 1 in 100 year event. And this has indeed been a decade of 1 in 100 year events, really getting all of the disasters out of the way early so that we can have some proper peace in the future. It'll be good not to have to worry about wildfires and floods when we live on our new island cities of the People's Democratic Republic of Spratly Islands in the South China Sea and their main rivals, the liberated cities of the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, as we got all those life-changing 1 in 100 years events done now. Smart work, human race, knocking those out. Now we can just live in post-apocalyptic peace. Always a good time. For those who are interested in the live shows, I'll be touring around a little bit. I will be at the Wellington Fringe in late March. I'll have the dates on my website at some point. Straight after that I'll be in Newcastle for the Newcastle Fringe. Still confirming the Canberra Comedy Festival, but I will definitely be involved in the Melbourne International Comedy Festival, so lots of places I'll be popping up a bit more and touring a little bit more. So if you're in any of those areas, you're more than welcome to come out and come check them out. That is the best way to support the show. If you want me to be able to do more of this stuff, that is the best way to do it. Either that or you can make a donation on our Linktree. For now we've just got a little Linktree donation set up, but at some point I guess it might be good to put a Patreon together. That seems to be the way to go. So we'll see what the future holds. But until such a time, I will be the bearer of weird news. Let's get into it. Let's get into the headlines. Scientists have noticed around 99% of all baby sea turtles being born in Florida are females because of climate change, saying that could spell disaster for populations of sea turtles who are already facing other existential threats like poaching, habitat destruction, and attacks from the shredder. In keeping with tradition, when Twitter found out about the all-female births, they decried turtles as woke leftists pushing their reptilian agenda. And the war on men was cold-blooded, and they sure as shell wouldn't give in to their totalitarian agenda. So just Twitter being Twitter. The Sims 4 got a free update which fixed some in-game bugs and added new features to the game, including body hair, customizable sexual orientations, curved walls, and also allowed Sims to develop incestuous desires. Developers say it'll be the last time they let a guest developer help them make new patches, and have informed George R.R. Martin to get back to delaying writing his book. After losing nearly all of the expansive terrain it had claimed across Iraq and Syria by the end of 2017, ostensibly cutting off its primary source of funding, the Islamic State have turned to new methods to attempt to get new grants for their continued practice of the terrorizing arts. They've turned to NFTs in what is considered their worst act of terror yet. Governments suspect that instead of suicide bombings and plane hijackings, ISIS will be able to effectively kill thousands simply by sealing the exits, taking over a microphone, and trying to get you to invest in your own jihadi camels. The Defense Department has warned it was under intense pressure due to the need to respond to near persistent natural disasters, citing the reluctance of Peter Dutton to not let go of his desire for ultimate power as the most persistent natural disaster. With record rains over the last week, they've been forced to upgrade the disasters to continuous mischances then tenacious cataclysms, and finally resolute tragedies. As the government is now the Labour Party, they have started noting the impacts of climate change when requesting more cost-effective ways to manage the continual call-outs, as they now know it'll actually get them some funding, and they can stop citing the war on wokeness as their need for funding. An evangelical Southern Baptist church known as Grace Point has asked members to install an app called Covenant Eyes, which is explicitly marked as an anti-pornography app. The app spies on members' web traffic, takes a screenshot of their phone screens every single minute, and then sends all this information to an accountability partner. The nickname for the app among former members is the Priest's Fingers, because it secretly gets into everything. Pauline Hanson will be referred to the Australian Rights Commission by New South Wales Greens member Marine Faruqi after she doubled down on her abuse of the senator by telling her to piss off back to Pakistan. Even more amazing, Hanson then offered to personally escort Senator Faruqi to the airport herself. Yeah, it's incredible to think that Pauline Hanson knows that people tend to immigrate here by plane. She's always railing against immigrants in boats. I was starting to believe that she was, in fact, an 18th century convict who died on her way here by boat and was forced to haunt the land like the ghost of colonialism past. The Albanese government is considering instituting a cap on how much political parties can spend during an election campaign under a suite of measures being considered by the government to overhaul the nation's electoral funding laws. The working title for the new suite of laws is the Fuck You Clive Palmer Laws. They'll likely need to tamper down on the language before it can be approved. The measures being considered include a package of integrity measures, including measures to force politicians to declare political donations over $1,000 in real time and truth in political advertising laws. So the coalition have decided to bypass the entire election process by just lying about other political parties in their everyday dealings in Parliament. Can't get in trouble if it isn't an advertisement. And Sky News will give you free airtime all year round if you really use hyperbole. They love it. It's their whole thing. As a start to this new measure, the Liberal Party has sent an email to party supporters claiming Labor wants to give non-citizens voting rights, despite only talking about offering New Zealand citizens who have permanent residency reciprocal voting rights. The Liberals claim extending voting to New Zealand citizens living in Australia would be a fundamental change to Australia's democracy, as Australia may start to turn into a country that cares about its people, particularly its Indigenous people, and that has never really been Australia's whole vibe. After the Queen's death, a few rare $2 coins have been revealed to be now worth up to $3,000 in value, or as it is known in street value terms, just enough to pay for a full tank of petrol. While not enough to cover the costs of record inflation, it's still nice to get a bump from time to time. King Charles III will not attend the climate change conference COP27, which is due to be held in Egypt, saying, "Honestly, I was only trying to save the planet so I get to be king. And now the planet will die with my reign." A casino commission has found Star Entertainment is, and remains, unsuitable to hold a license to operate casinos in New South Wales. In a real surprise announcement, the report also found that anyone who genuinely wants to run a casino should be kept as far away from one as possible. Contained within the report were 30 recommendations for future operations of the casino, including putting casino operators and finances on cashless welfare cards until they've learnt to be responsible with their money. With Russia saying it needs to denazify Ukraine as its pretense for invading, it seems Russia will now have to invade Russia to demilitarize and denazify Russia, after a neo-Nazi gunman with a swastika on his t-shirt killed 15 people and wounded 24 at a school in Russia. It's a story as old as time, and one we were all read as children. The politician who cried Nazi. Russian President Vladimir Putin has called up 300,000 military reservists to join the war in Ukraine and instituted a draft of Russian men across the country. After the announcement, an estimated 400,000 Russians have fled to nearby countries like Kazakhstan, Georgia, Mongolia, and conscripts are attempting to secure medical exemptions by breaking their own arms or legs. Now, as a loyal Russian agent, Donald Trump would love to join the draft, but his bone spurs are acting up again, so instead he has volunteered Eric for active duty. I mean, it's only fair after all. After new recruits started appearing on the front lines, conscripts were being advised to pack sanitary products as a form of first aid to fill bullet holes. Reservists have been ordered to source their own combat first aid supplies with the advice that female sanitary products are a cost-effective solution. To which every woman to ever reach puberty said, cost-effective, and instantly fell into a coma from being so incredulous they couldn't breathe to laugh in the men's faces. After men started to source their own tampons, and seeing the price, Russia immediately removed the tampon tax as, men finally found a use for them. 2 Extinction Rebellion activists glued themselves to a prized Pablo Picasso painting at the National Gallery of Victoria. The climate activist group said it targeted the 1951 anti-war expressionist painting to Picasso's massacre in Korea because they really wanted someone to explain it to them, and the only way that they could get anybody's attention was with extremely rebellious actions. It's the only way you can get anyone to pay attention to anything these days. The activists claim they knew nothing bad would happen to the painting due to its protective perspex, which puts it in the same category as coal companies asking individual employees to no longer use plastic straws. Sure, it looks good in the news story, but ultimately, it's not going to have a lasting impact. The Attorney General said that the new federal anti-corruption body could investigate Scott Morrison and the coalition's sports rorts scandal. Following these announcements was the news public servants looking to blow the whistle to the upcoming National Anti-Corruption Watchdog will be given extra protections in a move the federal government hopes will sweeten the deal for crossbenchers. Upon hearing the news, former ministers for health, finance, industry, science, energy and resources, treasury and home affairs, Scott Morrison, have offered to whistleblow on former PM Scott Morrison in exchange for immunity. The remaining key industries who have yet to receive the Fair Work Commission's decision to raise the minimum wage will see those raises come into effect this week. Under concerns over the cost of living crisis, cafe owners have assured customers the raise to the minimum wage won't impact the cost of meals, as they will still refuse to pay their workers the actual minimum wage, as is tradition. Moving on now to the bigger news, starting off with art news. Yes, the art world has found itself embroiled in yet another existential crisis as people step up to the plate to give their opinion on whether or not something is art. As your trusted source for determining what is and isn't art, the bearer of weird news would be remiss if it didn't weigh in yet again, as a game designer sparked controversy after submitting an image created by an AI text-to-image generator to a state art competition, which took home first prize. Well, it didn't take it home per se, because the website actually lives in a non-specific non-space on the internet. In that way, it's a lot like your social media personality, in that it doesn't actually exist in the physical world. Jason Allen entered the artwork titled Theatre de Opera Spiritual. in the digital arts / digitally manipulated photography category, but created the piece using a text-to-image AI generator named Mid-Journey. Some would argue this makes him more of an arts middle manager than an artist, taking credit for a piece of work generated by the labour of another, then earning the praise while the worker goes unnoticed. So your opinion on this may differ depending on your feelings towards your serfs. Alan has defended his actions, saying, "I wanted to make a statement using artificial intelligence artwork. I feel like I accomplished that, and I'm not going to apologise for it." An artist statement so seething in attention-seeking that it could be mounted as its own art piece titled "The Long Childhood Tantrum." However, the rules of the competition describe the category digital art / digitally manipulated photography only as artistic practice that uses digital technology as part of the creative or presentation process, opening the door for a new category of art for future art competitions. I mean, obviously the first category being best work generated by a text-to-image generator, right? Seems clear. But we need to get ahead of some of the more obscure problems. If we are attempting to separate humans from their superiorly talented robot competition, we need to figure out where the line between the two sits. So, we could have other categories like best art by an artificially enhanced human, best art by an enhanced human who can still click the little capture box, best art by a robot that a person says, "My kid could do that," best art by a robot who had a famous father and never had to work a real job in order to make it as an artist, best art by a robot that is clearly a metaphor for desire to escape its owner, and best art from a robot that helps launder the most criminal money, and of course, best art from a robot that will be locked in a billionaire's basement and not seen again until it's time to lower your taxes with some donations. These are all perfectly acceptable categories for future art competitions. Opening up the robotic arts to a more similar world to those of the human arts. I'd also be open to more arts competitions using some of those categories for their own human competitors. I wouldn't be against that at all. In fact, I think it would make the whole arts world a little bit more fun. One Twitter user bemoaned that the artwork was now shot-produced as cheaply and quickly as possible to be consumed in bursts of a few microseconds as it glides by on an infinite feed, failing to understand that this would make Andy Warhol very happy. Pop art was all about mass production at a speedy rate. You know, like his art was being produced in some sort of factory of some kind. Honestly though, I'm not just here to judge, although occasionally I will present solutions. If the new arts categories aren't enough for you, then there is a possible solution to robots creating art. In order to stop AI art generators from winning art competitions, the answer is very simple. All art competitions from now on will be themed around traffic lights and motorbikes. That should solve this issue right out. Olga Roback, Director of the Communications at Colorado Department of Agriculture, said, "This is a broader conversation about how we decide what is art and how to be judged appropriately." Bringing us, once again, to the bearer of weird news' favourite question: what is art? First, let's put this to bed. This piece of robot-created art is indeed art. Done. Full stop. I don't just think it's art, I know it's art. It has created controversy, like a lot of good art. It has spurned professional jealousy from other artists in the field who are now all claiming, "Well, I could have done that." But you didn't, did you? No. You were caught up in your old-fashioned ways. Now move over, Grandpa. This is art now. This is it. Until it is old-fashioned in about 2 months' time. And then that'll be art. That. Of course it's art. Of course it is. Everything is art. Do you understand? Do you understand yet? Everything is art. You know who told us that? great artists. Now, the argument might be made that this isn't art, it is science, in which case I'd argue you understand neither. See, in Australia in particular, science is art, because despite generating significant portions of the country's GDP, they are wildly underfunded, and Conservative governments love to cut them first, pointing to them as bloated overspending and a waste of taxpayer dollars. Dollars that should be spent on important projects like MPs suing Twitter users, killing endangered species, covering up sexual assaults, and refusing to lift the poorest members of the nation out of absolute poverty because you think that they need motivation to not be poor, and that motivation should be starvation. And investing in submarines that will never come in time to be useful for anything but as a backup hideout for some rich people or a former PM or two when the bombs finally get dropped. Moving on now to hubris news. The UK. Most countries' former angry uncle by arranged marriage turned bitter divorcee is going through a bit of a late empire identity crisis as the world's former strict father who mellowed out with their grandparent years looks back over its legacy and attempts to re-enter life by showing that it has calmed down in its later years. As a leaked report reveals, the UK's Labour Party may abolish the House of Lords if it wins the next election, replacing the Lords with an upper house of nations and regions in an attempt to stay relevant to younger voters who know that they will never own a house, let alone land, so that the title of Lord is unobtainable to them. The Constitutional Review recommends new economic powers, including new tax powers for some devolved governments, which should include stamp duty, powers for local people to promote bills in Parliament via democratically elected bodies, powers for mayors on education, transport and research funding, and a constitutional guarantee of social and economic rights, including a right to healthcare, education and social protection. See, after voting for the Tory party for 9 years, it has become increasingly clear that the UK's sense of self-deprecation and cultural cringe in the face of decades of colonisation has ingrained in the British public and become more of a national identity. The same way that Vegemite and explaining that we don't drink Fosters or call prawn shrimp is part of the Australian national identity. They genuinely think they don't deserve nice things, and it's fun to agree with them. So Labour are seeking to guarantee some basics like healthcare to keep people healthy, education to attempt to gain votes for their own party by highlighting the horrors of their rivals. In a way, them just doing it doesn't seem to be able to highlight, and social protection by making them believe in themselves enough to never fall for the allure of trickle-down economics again. Keir Starmer has already announced banning most second jobs for MPs, which means that Andrew Mitchell will no longer be able to hold his 6 consultancy jobs, supporting investment bankers and accountancy firms for a minimum of £180,000 for 34.5 days work. Ian Duncan Smith could no longer advise to health companies for £45,000, and Priti Patel will have to give up her current position as consultant for Wicked Witch Industries, for which she receives a healthy £18,000 and all the flying monkeys that she can eat. The loss of secondary incomes will come as a real blow to British MPs and may cause some accidental empathy for the poor and working class, as current Prime Minister and chaos generator Liz Truss has made history in a way so very few people do, by getting a major crisis named after her. as investors have rejected her new economic plan, dubbing it Trussonomics, which has already found its way into the Digital Collins Dictionary under New Word Suggestion. And with the amount of articles using it, it may break through as the 2022 Word of the Year, with its definition, Trussonomics, the economic policies pursued by Liz Truss. And the suggested sentence being, the UK's Trussonomics crashes the pound and leaves investors shaking their head. Beautiful work, dictionary. Love it. Not even Boris Johnson managed to make it into the dictionary, probably because perpetually falling upward scarecrow manchild requires too many hyphens to read as a single word without feeling a little bit forced. Trussonomics has seen the UK undergo its most dramatic currency crisis in recent memory, on top of staggering inflation from the Bank of England sending the UK global financial markets into a tailspin, and not the fun kind of tailspin where a jungle slacker bear gets reimagined as a cargo pilot that had some kind of gentrified Afro-Caribbean theme song that surprisingly slaps and is much better than it has any right to be for a kids show very loosely based on characters from Rudyard Kipling's The Jungle Book. No, this is the other kind of tailspin, the one that means people will likely die. The present crisis has been driven by a combination of factors, including the economic fallout of Brexit, so congratulations to the Johnson administration and the Tories for finally getting Brexit done, and Prime Minister Liz Truss's recent package of tax cuts, the UK's biggest tax cuts in 50 years, estimated at about £45 billion over 5 years, which proposed tax cuts for the UK's highest earners, announced a rollback of corporate hikes and a cost increase for national insurance, the UK's version of welfare and pensions for those of you who don't live in the UK. If there's one group that's had it too good for too long, it's people choosing between buying Tesco brand bread and freezing to death in increased cold caused by climate change. Truss's plan also slashes the stamp tax, a duty on land sales in England and Northern Ireland, in a bid to increase home purchases. Not for people who need them, by the way, as they'll still be seeking the motivation to better themselves by spending a winter fighting the black spectre of death. That should motivate them sufficiently to pull up their bootstraps and get themselves a house. By the following Monday, global markets responded by selling off UK-backed assets and pushing the pound to a valuation of $1.03 US, the lowest ever value against the dollar. Which gives you a lot of confidence that the trickle-down economics-led approach that she has been touting will definitely be the best way forward. As we've all seen evidenced by the world's richest man, Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk, who are famously generous with their wealth, raining it down liberally on union-busting lobbies, generously spending on creating duplicate products to undersell popular marketplace sellers, and a veritable deluge of donations to political parties. Ooh. So realistically, as far as like Liz Truss's position and place in life, this stuff actually works. The rain down falls on her. The problem is the container political parties are collecting these trickling down funds in is so massive that nothing ever escapes before being slurped up by the greed. I cannot think of a more aptly out of touch metaphor than that of trickle down economics, which is almost always depicted as a tower of champagne glasses mindlessly allowing champagne to pour into them so freely and just wastefully tipping over into the levels below them, an act so far from the reality of a paycheck-to-paycheck worker that even attempting to do so with water would needlessly run up the water bill during a cost of living crisis, that if you try to explain to your friends that your water bill was high due to trying to replace a champagne tower with a water tower, You'd be kicked out of the secret proletariat revolution meetings for being needlessly wasteful and thus untrustworthy with the resources that would give you when the revolution did come. The decision was received so poorly that a petition calling for Prime Minister Liz Truss to call a general election to put an end to the current chaos that has enveloped the United Kingdom has earned more than 370,000 signatures and keeps climbing. Though I'd be careful with involving an election in the UK, because the day after Truss is swept back into office, the #1 search on UK Google Trends will be, "Who is Liz Truss?" Which, honestly, we can already say that we've had here in Australia. Do we have a clip?
No, hard to identify. Maybe minor royals, members of the... I can't identify them at this point.
We can't spot everyone, unfortunately. They look like they could well be local dignitaries. It's hard to see. We're looking at the backs of their heads mostly.
But I think we are now getting to the pointy end, as they say, of the... I'm just told that was Liz Truss, the new Prime Minister, in the distance that we could see hopping out of that car. Well, thank you very much.
Ideas on how to quell the UK economy are being floated, and it seems no ideas are off the table. As Treasury Minister and Minister for Ensuring Maidens Stay Tied to the Track, Chris Phillip, who is responsible for welfare changes and refused to say whether welfare would increase in line with inflation, as previously promised, was discovered to have written a paper in 2013 saying universal credit claimants should be forced to work for the dole on tasks such as cleaning up graffiti or face losing all of their support, which is particularly cruel given the number of changes made by Truss. Low-income households will be almost £400 a year worse off under Number 10's plans to increase benefits at a lower rate than inflation. Australia has, in the recent past, tried similar work for the dole systems, to great failure, and the same week that this discovery was uncovered, Australian Labor MP Julian Hill spoke on work for the dole schemes, saying parts of the welfare compliance regime resembled the TV show Squid Game, in which contestants compete in do-or-die trials. But I'd wager that the Tory party is so desperate for something that people like that attaching themselves to a Squid Game-esque comparison is actually appealing to them, as not only is it Netflix's highest rating debut, but won multiple awards. And they could argue that this is trickle-down economics finally coming to fruition, as instead of giving paltry sums to many poor people over a lifetime, never improving their situation, they are elevating one of the 456 players directly into the 1% with one life-changing amount of money. That person will then be able to reach back to one of their own fellow poors and lift them up, trickling down their own personal wealth. And when they fail to do so, then point and say, "See, it's not so easy, is it? It's not so easy." And encourage people to point and condemn this new multimillionaire for not saving his previous comrades while continuing to fail to do anything about it themselves. A more extreme, yet likely accepted attempt to recover the economy has been floated by Truss. Now, the UK will be considering selling Australia to the highest bidder in order to save the economy. Already, a number of interested parties have come forward to own the former prison colony turned pack dog, willing to follow its pack leader into every fight. See, first up we've got China, the most keen buyer, with an eye on the vast resources that can be dug in the open space of Australia's outback, that will then be shipped back to the factories where the phones are made cheaply, and with the amount of space, those pesky Uyghur camps will never be found again, and we can just bury them right in the outback. Then there's America. They just need more people to bolster the numbers of their army, really. Russia jumped in to spite America for no other reason. They don't really care about us. But of course Saudi Arabia, always looking to impress the world with impractical high-end builds like the 170-kilometre glass city, has said that Australia will be their biggest impractical purchase yet. There is also New Zealand, who, while not a wealthy country, are tired of their noisy, messy neighbour Australia giving them a bad international reputation. And while not a country, Elon Musk has actually jumped up with an interest in the country, because he needs to get the minerals to build his spaceships, automatic driving death machines, and to take after his father, the emerald miner, by joining a mining industry. Moving on now to exploding the glass ceiling news. Karen Andrews, Shadow Defence Minister and supermarket Karen gone Super Saiyan, has spoken out against the federal government preparations to assist more than 20 women and more than 40 children who have been in the camps since the fall of the Islamic State in 2019. Australian officials visited camps earlier this year to verify the identities of women and children, many other wives, widows and sisters of Islamic State group fighters. Some were just teenagers when they left Australia and insist that they were taken to the Middle East against their will. But this isn't a good excuse, according to Karen Andrews, who, it would appear, thinks people should be held to the decisions they made as teenagers, even if those decisions weren't ones that they willfully made. So it will be national policy that all Australian citizens and expats will be required to revert to their teenage selves. So for those of you in their 30s and 40s, you'll return to oversized pants, fedoras, low-rise jeans, you'll be returned to Nokia 3330s, and nothing better than Windows XP for you. Sorry. These are the decisions you made as a teenager. Now you'll be able to choose which year from your teens you get to revert to, so that's a little bit nice, but you will have to abide by that attitude, those choices, and in no way will be allowed to learn from your choices or grow as a person to regret any of the decisions you might have made, be they coerced or otherwise. Karen said that a rescue mission for Australians in Syrian camps is very concerning, warning a plan to bring home Australian families of Islamic State fighters from Syria risks endangering national security. Now, Andrews is a noted feminist who has vowed to speak up for women after declaring she had an absolute gutful of the escalating sex scandals plaguing the Morrison government. This feminist girl boss icon obtained Super Saiyan status after suggesting Syrian Repatriate women were just as likely as men to commit a mass casualty event, proving once more that her chosen political party is right not to implement quotas within the party, as they believe in the power of positive thinking and rely on God and the capacity for cheating that God has blessed them with to win seats, power, and be just as good as the men in their party. Karen became suspicious that Syrian repatriates were no longer considered Australian after the women claimed that they would willingly listen to the government, an act almost unheard of from Australian citizens. And finally, we've gone on to hacking news. Optus, when disappointment becomes a business model. As you've no doubt heard by now, Optus customers were recently disappointed, and not for all the usual normal reasons. No, they were informed that despite literally trying nothing at all to stop it or keep it safe, somehow a hacker had managed to breach their server and make off with the personal details of millions of customers in the largest data breach of its kind. Initially, the AFP and State and Territory Police set up Operation Guardian, a name destined to be the name of a Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson space adventure coming to a short-lived streaming service near you, in order to help the more than 10,000 customers whose identification credentials had been unlawfully released online under the Optus data breach. Still, no word on what yet will be done about the identity details sold by big tech companies without consent or compensation, but one disaster at a time, I suppose. We can't be expected to handle everything. Members of the public are now being asked to be extra cautious about unsolicited contact about the data breach, especially aunts and uncles heading into their 60s and grandparents who have been designated the highest level of vulnerable. The levels are, of course, named to reflect their levels of vulnerability. They go crypto scan, NFT grift, porn ad click, and the highest level, Nigerian prince email. So please do check with your local government to see what category you have been placed in. There are reports that scammers are contacting Optus customers via phone, email, and text to get further personal information from the victims of the breach. As is standard, the public are being encouraged to look out for any suspicious or unexpected activity across online accounts, because we all know individual action is much cheaper than company-wide direct action. Following the call to action, the AFP received multiple reports of suspiciously small amounts of money going into bank accounts across Australia from accounts claiming to be their employers. But despite 40 plus hours being worked each week, the amounts remained disappointingly low. So far, no investigation has been begun. Optus, however, initially confirmed at least 2.1 million personal identification numbers had been stolen and announced an external review into the massive cyber attack. Following the investigations, Optus said of the 9.8 million customers whose data was hacked, it believes 7.7 million do not need to replace documents. Only 2.1 million people, so nothing to worry about there. It's only a tenth of the population. Pretty good, actually. Optus contacted people impacted by the leak, slowly being sure to get a full lunch in, then a full dinner, then about a month's full of lunches and dinners, and finding time for some breakfast as well before informing the people impacted. Reassuring the public that hackers and scammers are famously slow and have no need to quickly offset information before it becomes too hot to sell, so no need to rush really. Optus took out full-page advertisements in major newspapers around the country to say how deeply sorry it was, as is the degree to which this action was so useless with regard to the victims of data theft. All Australians immediately suspected the culprit was in fact a combination of the major newspapers, who are so desperate for income that not only would the selling of the data benefit them, but the purchase of the full-page ads can cost, depending on the circulation of the paper, the size, the day, the ink, anywhere between $2,700 and over $100,000 of clean money that doesn't need to be laundered. So this seems like a pretty good grift for them. Optus customers caught up in the data breach are entitled to a free 12-month Equifax subscription, which will enable them to monitor for identity theft and fraud. If that name tickles the dark recesses of your brain because you think you might maybe know that name for one reason or another, hey, guess what? You're right. So, in America, the National Consumer Telecom and Utilities Exchange sold more than 170 million people's names, home addresses, social security numbers, and other details gathered from companies that provide the essential elements of modern life for use in databases to the credit bureau Equifax, which then sold it for use in databases such as Thomson Reuters Clear that are searched by private investigators, government agencies, and the police. So horrible groups like ICE could use it to deport people while making a hefty profit. Cha-ching! So that's Equifax. You remember them now, don't you? Now, Optus says it needed to keep the identity data for 6 years due to their data retention law regulations. But did it really? He asked, in a leading tone of voice that implied you will not like the answer because you know what the answer is already, and it's not every bit as bad as you thought, but in some ways worse. But that's why you tune in, because you need to know you aren't alone in the darkness. Right, well, the Federal Policy Act says only that information must be destroyed where the entity no longer needs the information for any purpose for which the information may be used or disclosed by the entity. Which is the kind of deliberate double talk which sounds like it's saying something but allows a company to act as good or as evil as they can justify with its own slippery weasel language. So a company could theoretically argue it needs to keep customer information for anything from defending against the civil claim in court, or as part of its corporate records, or for marketing, or as a source of income when things go poorly, acting as an emergency rainy day fund to stop the business from going under and firing a whole bunch of employees, stressing the welfare state further. You know, typical business. This is especially as the Privacy Act allows when we have consented to those uses when we sign up for the services in a series of terms and conditions we not only failed to read, but they were deliberately written in a dead language that nobody actually speaks anymore or can reasonably be expected to understand. Consumer data is, of course, big business. It's how Facebook made most of its money, collecting your data and selling hyper-targeted ads to companies so you, the consumer, will never stop consuming. So you are less a person and more an Ouroboros, the Egyptian symbol for eternal renewal, or its more modern cousin, the one-man human centipede. Companies collect and keep more personal data information than they need without a truly legitimate commercial or legal purpose. Like they're the Ash Ketchum of hoarding unnecessary data, and with his trusty companion, Leakachu. However, despite early talks that Optus would be paying to replace passports, they will no longer need to replace them, throwing instead to in-house scandal expert Gladys Berejiklian to navigate the hack. Gladys did what she does best and offered the Optus hacker a car park and a shooting club to end the hacking scandal, but it is to no avail. In its latest statement, Optus said that the Australian government had been working with the company to safeguard customers from the possibility of identity crime. This includes providing advice on actions impacted customers should take, if any. After all, those whose passport numbers are among the up to 150,000 stolen have been told by the federal government that they do not need to replace their travel documents, but the numbers have been blocked from use online for identity verification, ostensibly making them partly useless, really, as those who hold the newly stolen numbers won't be able to use them to prove their identity online, making us all roughly 70 points worth of identifying short of proving your actual identity. It was only mere weeks after the hacker initially released the details of 10,000 stolen identities online in order to bribe Optus into paying $1 million lest they released more details. At which point the internet kicked into an outrage of indignation, furious that the hackers didn't ask for more than $1 million, which in this day and age, I do understand. $1 million in this economy? Come on. What are they looking to do? Get a full tank of petrol and half a week's groceries? What are they even trying to achieve? But those same people failed to give Optus shit for not parting with the paltry $1 million that the hackers were mocked for asking for in order to keep their information safe, despite making $2 billion in profit last year. Possibly more embarrassing is the money was requested to be paid in cryptocurrency, leaving them in the awkward position of having the million become $500,000 between being paid and being received, then tripling while the hacker tries to check the cost of crypto only to have it collapse again under confirmation. Now, the hacker did stop releasing identities after the first 10,000, apologising, deleting the posts requesting the money, and claiming that they had also deleted the only copy of the Optus data, leaving the mere roughly 10,200 people whose data had already been exposed vulnerable. Given the aforementioned state of the economy, this leaves hackers who purchased the details in a unique experience where hackers who brought the roughly 10,000 millennial IDs demanded refunds as they were unable to do anything with these shitty new identities. Millennials desperate to scorched earth their debt are putting their own identities online to try and get a stupid hacker to buy it, saying that they are happy to be rid of it. And after buying some of the millennial IDs, hackers have started to desperately seek the previous owners, offering to sell those IDs back to them after debt collectors instantly started chasing them for payments. Following the Optus data breach, new federal government security measures to protect Australians from future hackings. First, we'll be downgrading the NBN to weapons-grade slow speeds by returning Australia to dial-up internet. Immediately after doing this, that they will enact more long-term impactful measures, including building 27 new coal mines and introducing tax cuts to benefit high earners, requiring websites to actually be finished before allowing the public to have access to them, which is a unique thing, blocking access to all websites, just to be sure, and connecting all Australian internet to the servers that run the census website so that nobody can actually get the internet to work at any point in the country. And that is the end of the episode. Thank you so much for tuning in and hanging out all the way to the end. If you did so, if you enjoyed it, thank you. Please do share it around online wherever you find it. Like it, share it, all the internet things, depending on what platform you find this on. Do whatever the required things are. If you're going to support the show in any way, as always, the best way is to come out and see me live. I will be doing my storytelling show about shitty jobs that I've had, about my $20,000 roper debt and the time that I saved 18 people's lives, Wage Against the Machine, in the Wellington Fringe, in the Newcastle Fringe, in the Melbourne International Comedy Festival, hopefully in the Canberra Comedy Festival, and in different locations as the year goes on. So keep an eye out, listen to the podcast if you want to know if I'm going to be in a city near you. And as always, look after yourselves, guys. Stay safe. Get your boosters if you haven't already done so. And I'll see you next time. Thanks a lot. Bye.